I'm not stupid, just a bit thick sometimes. But just for the record, I'm technically a genius, at least according to Mensa. I took their test once, mostly because my wife challenged me to, and I passed. But I've never really fit in with that crowd. Anyway, that's where the story really begins. I met my wife back when I was a student at the University of Texas. I was enrolled in the honors program at the McCombs School of Business, which is consistently ranked among the top 10 business schools in the nation. But I was also part of Plan 2, which, while less known, is even more exclusive. It's an interdisciplinary liberal arts program that's been around since the 1930s, with only about 100 students accepted each year. The program was intense. We took specialized, advanced versions of the university's core courses, which ended up forming our major. These classes were taught by top scholars and were incredibly intimate. My freshman English class had just 9 students, while my American history course had 15. Both counted toward my major. Since Plan 2 covers your major requirements in the first 2 years, the last 2 are essentially wide open. Most students chose to double major. For me, that meant adding a business degree on top of it. Plan 2 likes to boast that it's Ivy League quality, and to be fair, it really is. But it's also full of pretentious intellectuals. That's where I met Jacqueline. For her, it was love at first sight. For me, well, it took a bit longer. It wasn't that she wasn't attractive. She absolutely was. In fact, by anyone's standards, she was stunning, and in the world of Plan 2, she might as well have been Miss Universe. But my issue was with the atmosphere. I couldn't stand the Plan 2 pretentiousness. Sure, I love the classes and the professors, but I've always found that intellectuals can be so wrapped up in their own brilliance that they become completely clueless. McCombs wasn't much better. The place was full of people constantly trying to outshine one another, not just with how smart they were, but also with bragging rights about the prestigious jobs they were bound to land or how quickly they'd hit their second million. It was like a parade of peacocks, with egos so inflated there was hardly room left for my own, which is, admittedly, a bit more modest. Despite my reservations, I had to attend those faculty teas and luncheons. That's where you rubbed shoulders with professors, and more importantly, where they got to know you. If you wanted those all-important letters of recommendation, skipping them wasn't an option. Jacqueline wasn't in McCombs, but she started showing up at those events as well as at the Plan 2 gatherings. I only realized this later when she told me. Honestly, I didn't truly notice her until she came to one of my rugby matches. Rugby isn't an official UT sport, but the Department of Recreation sponsors the club team. We not only get to play against other Big 12 teams, but also compete for a national title with universities across the country. We always had a great time with rugby, but let's be honest, a big crowd for our games was usually just our girlfriends cheering us on. Jacqueline had been chasing me for nearly a year when, finally, I experienced my own love at first sight moment with her. She had the most striking shade of red hair, paired with the fairest skin imaginable. And her figure. Wow, it was enough to make me lose focus during a scrum, which is pretty much the worst thing a hooker can do. After that game, which we lost to Rice, I gathered up the courage to walk over and introduce myself. It was one of the scariest things I'd ever done. You see, Jacqueline stands a statuesque 5 feet 11 inches, and I'm just 5 feet 3 inches, even in my thickest shoes. I'm built like a hooker because, well, I am one, compact and powerful. And yes, I've heard all the short jokes, as well as the ones about rugby hookers and street hookers. None of them are funny, at least not to me. Sure, I'm compact, but I'm also one of the fastest and strongest players on the team. Not just pound for pound, but overall. People have accused me of having a Napoleon complex because of my height. I don't see it that way. In first grade, I made a decision. If anyone mistook compact for inadequate, they'd regret it. Growing up, I was always a solid athlete, as great as a 5 feet 3 inches, 120-pound guy could be. That meant I consistently made varsity, but I was rarely a starter. An athletic scholarship was never even a distant dream. But Jacqueline made me feel like I was 6 feet tall, even when she wore 3-inch heels. Honestly, I loved it when she wore those heels. They showcased her perfect legs, but more importantly, it was proof that my height truly didn't matter to her. Jacqueline was my dream girl, and from the moment she smiled at me, I was completely, hopelessly hers. Jacqueline came from a humble background in deep East Texas. Her father, who worked in the oil fields, was injured on the job and later died in a drunk driving accident when Jacqueline was in second grade. Her mother worked as an office clerk at a small insurance agency. Jacqueline was attending UT on a full academic scholarship, though she probably could have qualified for a needs-based one too if she'd needed it. We officially met in the fall of my junior year, and by midterm of my senior year, we were married. The only thing we ever argued about was sex. I was ready for it on our first date, but Jacqueline wasn't. At that point, I was still a virgin. She was not. Before Jacqueline, I had always been the pal every girl confided in. I went on dates, sure, but they usually ended up with me listening to my date talk about the guy she really wanted to be with. I know I could have had sympathy sex if I wanted, but I was holding out for a girl who genuinely wanted me. Jacqueline told me she'd had one serious boyfriend in high school. She was convinced they'd get married, but when she found him cheating, she made a solemn vow to herself. No more sex until marriage. Honestly, I don't know if we would have made it if she hadn't defined sex strictly as vaginal intercourse. She was incredible at everything else, but that also made me respect her even more. She kept her word. Her promises genuinely mattered to her. There were definitely moments before we got married when I could tell she wanted me just as much as I wanted her, but she never let her desires get the best of her. Her self-control and integrity not only deepened my admiration for her, but also inspired me to be just as committed. We didn't have our first real argument until after we were married, but when it finally happened, it was a big one. Jacqueline had assumed all along that I would go to work for my parents after graduation. I do love my folks. They own 4 franchises down in Houston. Not McDonald's, but definitely a brand you've probably heard of or seen advertised on TV. Each location nets about $75,000 to $100,000 a year, so they're comfortable, not Texas oil-rich, but certainly well off. My dad had plans to expand but couldn't do it without a trustworthy manager, and to him, trustworthy meant family. That, in his mind, meant me. I'm 4 years older than my sister, who had been set on becoming a doctor since kindergarten, so the role fell to me. He offered a generous incentive package to entice us to move back to Houston. But I didn't want that life. I loved Austin, the vibe, the culture, and besides, I had already set my sights on a small, up-and-coming tech company there. It wasn't Dell, but I was convinced they had a better business model. I was eager to take a chance on it. However, when Jacqueline saw the offer from my dad, she reconsidered her objections. The incentive package was too good to pass up, and as soon as she graduated, we bought our first house and moved to Houston. Life was good for a while, but as Dell grew, the startup I joined faltered. Eventually, I found myself out of a job for the first time. Thankfully, I had cashed out my stock options early, so I decided it was the perfect opportunity to go back to school and get my MBA. I chose Wharton, completed the program in 2 years, and landed a fantastic job with one of the big banks back in Austin. We were back on top, catching the wave of Austin's real estate booms and busts, and eventually settled into a big house out by the lake. We had 2 kids, and our garage had matching his and hers BMWs. Life, for a while, was everything we dreamed it could be. After 10 years of marriage, I reached a breaking point. I realized I was done with chasing multimillions and tired of working for someone else. So, I made a big decision. I told Jacqueline I wanted to start my own business. I took most of our liquid savings and bought a franchise, the same brand my dad owned. I had never actually worked in one of his stores before, and I quickly learned that running one was far more work than I anticipated. In the beginning, we didn't pull in the profits my dad's stores did, but we were still comfortable. However, what I didn't share with Jacqueline was my real motivation. Deep down, I wanted to write. That old plan to itch for intellectual and creative pursuits had finally caught up with me. Once I had the franchise running smoothly, I spent more and more time holed up in my office, writing. I didn't want Jacqueline to know about my crazy dream until I had something tangible to show for it. Something published, something that could prove I wasn't just chasing a delusion. But from her perspective, all she could see was that we were making only a fraction of what I used to earn, and I wasn't putting any effort into expanding the business. Meanwhile, we were surrounded by a hyper-competitive social circle. Even in Austin's laid-back atmosphere, we were living among billionaires and those who measured success by the size of their houses, boats, and luxury cars. For me, though, the thrill of keeping up with that crowd had faded. I didn't care about winning the toy race anymore. But to be fair, I made that decision unilaterally. I never sat down with Jacqueline to discuss it, and she never agreed to it. That's when the fighting started. It lasted almost a year, turning our home into a constant battleground. And then, almost as suddenly as it began, the fighting stopped. But along with the arguments, something else disappeared. The warmth, the intimacy, the affection. Sex became a rare event, but at the time, I didn't think much of it. I was so focused on my writing, I never suspected a thing. I'm not oblivious. I knew money was important to Jacqueline, but I genuinely believed I could bring in a good income as a writer. If I had actually done my research on what most writers earn, I might have had second thoughts, but sometimes ignorance really is bliss. I threw myself into my new passion, finishing my first book and starting the long process of finding an agent. By the time I completed my second book, agents were finally starting to return my emails. Then, after wrapping up my third book, I got the call every aspiring writer dreams of. A publisher wanted to buy all three. Even better, they offered me a $30,000 advance for each one. For an unpublished writer, that was like hitting a grand slam. I was over the moon. I had a little voice recorder I used for practicing dialogue, so I even recorded the publisher's offer. I wanted to share the excitement with Jacqueline in the most dramatic way possible. I called her up, thrilled, and told her to book a babysitter and put on her best dress. We were going out to celebrate with dinner at Green Pastures, one of the finest restaurants in Austin, but her lukewarm response should have set off alarm bells. Jacqueline not being excited about an impromptu midweek date to the best place in town? That alone should have triggered warning flares. We arrived at Green Pastures early enough to see the peacocks wandering the grounds, and were seated in a beautifully intimate room with a perfectly set table. I ordered their signature milk punch, while Jacqueline opted for a margarita. I could feel the tension radiating off Jacqueline throughout dinner, but I was too caught up in my own excitement to pay much attention. I had planned to reveal my big news during dessert, to surprise her with the good news about the book deal. But then her phone rang. I watched her answer with an irritated tone. "We're at dinner." "You're kidding." "Here? Now?" she said, her voice shifting between annoyance and something else. "No, not until this weekend." Then, suddenly, she giggled. She continued, "No, I told you how I wanted to do it. I can't. Please, Harold, not here." She let out a frustrated sigh and listened for a moment before saying, "Are you sure? Just like we practiced?" Her face grew tense, her expression hardening in a way I'd never seen before. I had my little recorder in hand, ready to play the publisher's message for her, but an instinct made me hit the record button instead when she started speaking to Harold. "Okay," she finally said, her voice cold. "But you'd better be here. This is going to be ugly." "Okay, I love you too." She hung up and turned to me with an expression that cut right through me, a mix of disdain and something almost cruel. "I'm leaving you," she announced flatly, her eyes locked on mine. "I can't stay married to a loser. I've been having an affair for the past 6 months, and all you've got now is my sloppy seconds. I despise you. I only married you because I thought you'd make it big, but you're nothing but a failure." Her words came out like daggers. "And no," she added with a cruel laugh, "nothing about you is big. You have the smallest," she paused for emphasis, relishing every word, "the smallest I've ever seen on a grown man. I'm shocked you even managed to get me pregnant." She leaned in, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're so short, I don't trust you to be alone with the kids. How could you protect them if some kindergarten bully showed up? You're too little, in every sense. That's why I'm not going to allow you any custody. They've already been shortchanged by inheriting your DNA. I won't let them be poisoned further by your pathetic, tiny ambitions." It was like the ground had opened up beneath me. I was stunned, utterly blindsided, and in that moment, the celebration I had envisioned turned into a nightmare. I'm not naive. I knew Jacqueline married me for the potential she saw in my career, for where she thought I could take her. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. The sudden shift from her usual demeanor after that phone call was jarring. I didn't react as she'd expected because I couldn't wrap my head around how quickly everything had turned. It felt like a switch had flipped. Then it hit me. She was trying to provoke me, to push me into losing my temper in public. She knew I had a hair-trigger temper about certain things, though I'd never once raised a hand to her. And here she was, banking on me snapping right there in that restaurant. But instead of taking the bait, I kept my composure and said, with as much sincerity as I could muster, "Jacqueline, I love you. Why are you doing this?" Her face contorted into an ugly, venomous sneer, and her voice rose to a near shout, drawing the attention of everyone around us. "I was willing to tolerate your pathetic little limp excuse for a manhood, as long as you were going places," she spat. "I've told you countless times, I won't be some lower-middle-class housewife. But you never listened. And if that wasn't bad enough, you're utterly clueless in bed. All you ever want to do is poke me with that pitiful pencil for 5 seconds. I've hated every minute of it. Years of playing sports had taught me how to stay calm under pressure, and I clung to that skill now." I wasn't entirely sure why she was raising her voice so loudly, but I noticed the maitre d' inching closer, ready to intervene if things escalated further. I tried to keep my voice calm, though every muscle in my body was tense. "Jacqueline, lower your voice, or we're going to get thrown out of here," I said evenly. "I love you. I've never been unfaithful, and even if you have, I'm willing to work through this. She was practically shaking with fury now, her breath coming in harsh, angry gasps. My refusal to lose my temper was clearly driving her mad, but she did drop her voice to a hiss. The only thing to work out, tiny tallywhacker, is how much time you'll get with the kids and how much you're willing to pay for it, she snarled. I kept my expression as neutral as possible, clenching my jaw to hold back my rising anger. Have the kids ever been in the house while you've entertained your real man? For a brief moment, she seemed thrown off, but then her eyes glinted with malice. Of course, she sneered. I just told them Mommy found a happy machine when they heard me screaming with joy. I took a deep breath, my voice as cold as ice. Jacqueline, I heard you making plans with him to pick you up. I'm going home now, and tomorrow I'll help you move out. I won't tolerate that behavior around my children. From now on, all our discussions will be through our lawyers. Her face twisted into something almost unrecognizable, a mask of pure hatred. I'm going to take you for everything you've got, she spat. Years of pretending deserve compensation. I'm going to marry Harold. He's 6 feet 1 inch, a successful pediatrician, and he can afford the best. If you even think about fighting for custody, I'll bankrupt you. I turned off the recorder and said softly, I can't believe you're this reckless. I know you're after the money, but don't you realize that any man who would cheat with you will do the same to you? He's not going to fight for kids he doesn't want, and if he does marry you, I'll bet you $10,000 it won't last 2 years. I stood up and walked over to the maitre d'. I handed him my credit card and asked him to run it right away, as I'd be canceling it in 10 minutes. Jacqueline had already grabbed her things and sashayed out the door by the time the manager returned with the receipt. He was an acquaintance from local restaurant association meetings. He gave me a sympathetic look and whispered, I'm sorry, but I couldn't help overhearing. Do you know that the best divorce lawyer in Austin is dining here tonight? She's trying to stay under the radar, but if I were you, I'd speak to her before you leave. It's almost impossible to get an appointment with her at her office. I was still in shock. I hadn't thought about what to do next, but the manager gestured to a smartly dressed couple at a table nearby. The man was old enough to be her father, but she was about my age. I recognized her immediately. She'd taken my friend, Alan Burke, to the cleaners in a divorce that was like something out of an old country song. She got the gold mine and I got the shaft. Noticing my gaze, she glanced up and gave me a sympathetic look, though her body language clearly said, please don't bother me while I'm eating. But I wasn't deterred. I slid a business card onto her table and said, I don't want to ruin your dinner, but I'd appreciate the chance to speak with you whenever you can fit me into your schedule. She let out a deep sigh and said, I'm very expensive. I nodded and cut her off, I know, but my friend Alan Burke learned the hard way. It's even more expensive to have you sitting across the table from him. Do you have any cash on you? She asked cryptically. I rarely carry cash, but I checked my wallet and found a freshly broken 20. She reached in, took my 10, leaving me with a couple of ones and said, okay, you've hired me. Now go home, keep your cool, and do not let her push you out of the house. I'll be there after I finish dinner. I hate seeing ambushes like this. Do you know who her lawyer is? I didn't know we were in trouble, I replied. I didn't know she was having an affair. I just set this up to tell her about my book deal. Have you signed the contract yet? No, I just heard back. Don't sign it until I give you the go-ahead. You don't want that to become community property. Dad, can you handle this? George here needs my help. You don't remember me, do you, George? I looked at her again. I knew I'd seen her before, but aside from Alan's divorce, I didn't think we'd ever actually met. Austin isn't a huge social scene, but it has its divides. Politicians, lawyers, and the like tend to run in different circles from the high-tech crowd I was used to. I hadn't been out much the past 3 years, so while I recognized her, I was still trying to place her name. Seeing my struggle, she smiled and said, I'm Martha White. We were in Plan 2 in McCombs together. Not many of us did both. I thought you might remember me. She grabbed my arm and led me out of the restaurant. Where are you parked? I pointed to my SUV, which was now visibly damaged, with at least 2 flat tires. They really aren't playing fair, are they? Are your kids at home? I told her the kids were at home as she guided me to her car, driving at full speed toward my house. When we arrived, she handed me money for the babysitter and instructed me, go to your computer, close your accounts, and start transferring cash to your business accounts. It's still community property, but draining that account could be considered illegal, and I doubt her lawyer would let that slide. I'll wait for the happy couple to get here. I was finishing up when Martha came back into the room. They weren't as well prepared as they should have been. I think they jumped the gun. They had planned this for later but decided tonight was too perfect to pass up. They made a big mistake leaving the house together. I want you to call a locksmith and have all the locks changed tonight. Disable the garage door opener. Do you have anyone you completely trust to take care of your kids? I paused for a moment before replying. My sister lives in Georgetown. It'll take her about a half hour to get here. She's on staff at Scott and White Clinic in Temple. I trust her with the kids. Great. How old is your youngest? Cindy will be 3 next month, and Josh is almost 5. He'll start kindergarten in the fall. Scott and White is a prestigious place. What does your sister do there? She's a neonatal specialist. She just finished her residency at Johns Hopkins and has a son the same age as Cindy. Great. Get that locksmith out here ASAP. Do you think your sister would drop everything and come at this hour? I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me. Let's just say Jacqueline wasn't exactly one of her favorite people. She might not drive quite as fast as you did, but she'll be here in no time. And while she'll never say it aloud, expect more than a few "I told you so's." Martha's expression softened. It's situations like this that keep me from ever getting married. I guess I've become numb to it after all these years, but look, would it offend you if I prayed for you? I was taken aback, truly seeing Martha for the first time as someone who genuinely cared. I gave her a nervous nod, and she continued, I suspect they're going to call it a night. But if they reach out to their lawyer, your wife will be back here fast, so we can't claim desertion. I pulled a pretty big bluff. I told them that you didn't want either of them in the house, and that you'd call the police if they tried to come in. I did manage to get something close to that out of you on the way over, but legally, you don't have grounds to deny her access to the house unless she leaves voluntarily. Trying to lighten the mood, I cracked a joke. With the way you drive, I would have offered half my kingdom to get you to slow down. She gave me one of those looks, one that seems to be ingrained in every woman's DNA, and ignored my attempt at humor. They're being a mix of smart and stupid, which is why I'm betting they're working without guidance. I'm pretty sure I know the sleazy attorney advising them, and believe me, no lawyer I know would be worth a joke. If they were following his advice, he would have been at the restaurant with a photographer in tow. The bottom line is, if she leaves tonight, you might be able to claim desertion. My sister arrived, impressed by my restraint, and couldn't resist offering a few choice comments about Jacqueline that she'd been holding onto for years. She took the kids with her, and the locksmith arrived shortly after, changing the locks and the garage code. Martha connected to her office from my computer, printed some papers, and had me sign them, including her contract. I couldn't help but shudder at the amount I'd already spent tonight. As she was leaving, I remembered the recording of Jacqueline's words. Handing it to her felt like handing a shark its teeth. Unsettling, even if the shark was on my side. The divorce turned into a costly and contentious affair. Jacqueline got more than I thought she deserved, but I gained full physical custody of the kids. She didn't even get visitation rights, although I informally agreed to give her full access whenever she wanted, as long as she notified me and kept them on my property. The day the court session ended, everything was packed, and we were headed to Ireland. I rented a small, secluded cottage near Doolin on the west coast, a perfect spot if you love traditional Irish music. I enrolled the kids in the local school and quickly settled into the rhythm of life in the local pubs. One of the perks of being a writer is the freedom to work from anywhere, and I could easily justify living in such a unique place as a research expense for my work, studying local culture, of course. It took Jacqueline and a lot of her new husband's money nearly 6 months to track me down. When she called, I agreed to let her visit the kids, but warned her that we were in the middle of packing and leaving the next morning. Our household goods were already gone. I suggested she wait until we were settled in our new place, and promised to notify her once we were settled. I figured it would take about as long for her to find me as it would for us to get fully settled, and I ended the call before remembering to tell her where we were moving. In the meantime, I'd written a bestseller. No, it didn't hit #1, but it did make it to the second-to-last spot on the New York Times bestseller list for a week. It was about an Austin pediatrician who secretly was a sex offender, a truly despicable character. One reviewer even called my villain one of the all-time greats. For some reason, Jacqueline's husband, the pediatrician, lost a significant portion of his practice right after the book came out. He was forced to abandon his career and relocate to Lubbock, where he joined the staff at the medical school. 3 months later, Jacqueline and her husband's money found me again. We had moved to the Scottish Highlands, about 100 miles north of Inverness, near John O'Groats. I apologized for not reaching out sooner and explained that just when we were nearly settled, I discovered I had developed an allergy and we were in the middle of moving again. I told her the house was packed, and we were leaving that very afternoon to tour the Algarve in search of a new place. I promised to contact her once we were settled. After I hung up, it dawned on me that I'd never had any allergy issues in Ireland, and besides, they spoke English there. So, I decided to try a small town along the southern coast this time. One of the perks of being a best-selling author doing local research in a remote place is that strangers tend to stand out. Locals, wary of most outsiders, are surprisingly accepting of eccentric writers. They'll often give you a heads up if someone starts asking too many questions. I had nearly a full week's notice in Scotland, for example. My next book also made the bestseller list, landing third from the bottom and staying there for 2 weeks. It was about a sinister sex offender pediatric professor from Austin who had secured a job at a medical school in Lubbock. This character was also conducting unauthorized experiments on his students, leaving them sterile and impotent. As luck would have it, Jacqueline's husband, the pediatrician, seemed to have no interest in either working in a medical school or in saving their relationship. He switched careers and joined the public health service. Another strange coincidence. I had just about decided that my next book would center around a scandal involving a former medical school professor turned public health worker. There's an old saying about never picking a fight with an organization that buys ink by the barrel. Or maybe it was the pen is mightier than the sword. Either way, it felt like I was writing from a place of uncanny inspiration. I did stay in touch with Austin, though. That relentless divorce lawyer kept following me. She started flying in to visit when I was living in Ireland the first time, then followed me to Scotland, and then back to Ireland. She was worse than Alamy Cricket. I had to listen to endless rants about keeping the kids from their mother, though she never put it that way. She'd recount cases where the mother had ducked out and isolated the kids from a good father. I wasn't oblivious, so it annoyed me after a while. But, Lord, that woman's kisses could make my toes tingle. After nearly a year, the way she said hello over the phone in that sultry tone was almost enough to make me lose control. Maybe it was just the fact that I'd been holding back for so long. At first, I wasn't interested in women at all, but Martha had a way of getting under my skin. What is it about me that seems to attract women who are against premarital sex? At least Martha shared the same interpretation of that rule as Jacqueline did. About 18 months after my divorce, I returned to Austin. Martha had finally put her foot down. I knew she despised Jacqueline, but she told me that what I was doing with the kids was immoral, and she wouldn't get engaged to an immoral man. I make a lot of money from men trying to be a daddy to their kids when the wife and her new love move off to Timbuktu. I think that's evil. It doesn't look any better when a man does it. Your game's cute, and I don't care what you do to that bitch, but she will always be their mother. We can't change that. You're within your legal rights, but is it moral? She had me, and she knew it. There's no denying how much less appealing that shark smile is when it's accompanied by gloating. I'd like to think I responded solely to Martha's moral argument, but it might have also been the comment she made about her biological clock giving her fits. She insisted that her kids were going to be born and raised as Texans. So, I proposed to her at a castle I'd rented for a weekend visit. We were married at her childhood church near El Paso. The moving truck had just backed into the driveway of our new house by the lake in Austin when Jacqueline called me on my cell. She was desperate, crying, and begging to see her children. I guess some of my anger had faded over time. Or maybe I was just getting soft in my old age. Then again, it could have been the look Martha was giving me. Either way, I agreed to let Jacqueline see the kids, and less than a minute later, she knocked on the door. I wasn't really surprised. It had been a long game of cat and mouse, but she knew who to thank for me no longer playing. When I opened the door, I said, "Here are the ground rules. You'll be monitored electronically. First, if you say one bad thing about me, I'll move to Timbuktu and you'll never see them again. Second, if I get the faintest hint of you challenging custody, we're gone. However, if you follow my rules, I'll let you be a part of their lives from now on. I'll help you repair your relationship with them. You can attend all their games and school activities. Do you agree? Yes or no? That's the last word I ever want to hear from you." With tears in her eyes, she nodded and said, "Yes." She turned to Martha and mouthed, "Thank you." I have to admit, I'd felt pretty rotten about how I'd poisoned the kids' feelings toward her. I wasn't proud of what they said to her when she joined them in the backyard. Kids can be cruel, but Jacqueline stuck to her word. After about 6 months, things were as good as they could get in a divorce situation. It was hard for everyone, but Jacqueline had changed too. She'd started teaching kindergarten, was totally devoted to her kids, and had adhered to all my rules, including never saying another word to me. She even seemed content with her modest salary. The really funny thing was that anyone who knew Jacqueline could see that she was in love with me. Jacqueline is one of those women whose love needs a strong man. It's just too bad she didn't realize she'd married one. Me? For some reason, I've continued to mellow. A shark can be very persuasive, especially when they give you that special smile. Husbands, you know the one. Martha and I are now expecting our second child. I've learned what a true partnership can be when both people are equal. Most of all, I've learned how a strong woman's love can make a man a better person. Happy feels so inadequate to describe what we have. As time passed, I found myself not only adapting to my new life, but truly thriving in it. The struggles, the pain, the battles, they all started to fade into the past, replaced by the warmth of a life I never thought possible. I had built something real, something solid. Martha and I, we were a team. We worked together, raised our children together, and most importantly, loved each other deeply. I realized that the person I had been before, the man hardened by anger, betrayal, and frustration, was no longer who I was. Martha had shown me a different way, a way to be vulnerable, to be open, to love without hesitation. We had our fair share of challenges, but nothing felt insurmountable when we faced it together. The kids were thriving too. They had blossomed in the loving environment we created, and even Jacqueline, in her own way, had found a sense of peace. I couldn't help but feel a little proud of myself for having kept my word and not letting the bitterness consume me. The bond one had with the kids was stronger than ever, and I could see the healing that was taking place, not just in their lives, but in mine as well. And then, there were the small moments, the laughter at the dinner table, the late-night talks with Martha about our dreams and our future, the quiet mornings with the kids, watching them grow. These moments were the ones that made everything worth it. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. As for me, I had become the man I never knew I could be. Not just a father, not just a partner, but someone who had learned the true meaning of love and redemption. I had no more regrets, no more doubts. I had found my peace, and with Martha by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next with strength, love, and a sense of contentment I had never known before. In the end, I had discovered that happiness wasn't about escaping the past. It was about learning from it, growing from it, and embracing the future. And as I watched Martha smile at me across the room, I realized that the best part of all was the journey we had ahead. Together. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.